This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Greetings, junkies. Welcome to the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. My name is Tokyo Xtreme Brian, and I am joined today by Super Magnetic Lewis. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm sat here and I've got all these metal things just attracting to me, and I'm trying to swat them away. So thanks for that, Brian. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, that's the choice you made by being so magnetic, sir.
Yeah.
And then, today we're joined by a very special guest, Michael Arkin, or do you just go by Mike?
Yeah, it's Mike, unless you're my mom, and you're not.
I'm not. Thank you for joining us. Mike, you've been involved in video game publishing for quite a long time, stemming back to the early days of Acclaim, and went on to Sony ImageSoft and Fox Interactive, Activision, and then you spent a fair amount of time working on several projects as the executive producer at Crave for many games that we continue to play today. So thank you for joining us. And
I'm so sorry. There are better things you could be doing with your life.
Yeah, well, it's a life well wasted, I suppose. And then today, we can also talk a little later about some of the things you're working on now at Argonaut as the co-CEO. But yeah, I mean, I think before we just get into too much of the weeds there, we can just start with a softball question. And what got you into this crazy medium of ours? What video games did you play early on?
I mean, early on, I'm a kid of the 80s, so it was mostly, it was arcades. And, I lived in New York, and there was Penn Station, which is the train station that goes to Long Island, had a huge arcade. And I would, often be there playing games. And that's, back in the days when it was a quarter, right? It was like today, I think it's like $1. And, and I would just go and play and I don't know, like I would say to friends, like, oh, when I grow up, I want to work, I want to make video games. But it was like, and my other friend would say, and I grew up, I want to be a helicopter. It was like the same kind of, like, there was no, like, I didn't really have a plan or anything. Mm-hmm. And I was very lucky that I accidentally walked into Acclaim, and Acclaim was 4 people or something in like a tiny little office. And, when I realized what was going on, I just, I said, like, can I work here? I was 18, like, I just thought you could just work places. Like, just say, I want to work here, and you're in. But they said, okay.
Yeah.
Like, they literally were like, okay, sure. We're looking for someone who can play, like, can you play games? And I was like, yeah. and that was like kind of the interview, to be honest. Like, they handed me a controller, and it was NES Wizards and Warriors, and I played it for like 5 minutes and had no idea what I was doing, and I just said, this game's all right. Like, yeah. And they were like, can you start on Monday?
You must have played it well in those 5 minutes then, if you got the job, just from that.
Well, like, in all seriousness, there were like, I was the 7th employee, and I think number 6 was someone named Donna, who was like an assistant, and all of those, it was the 3 founders, it was a salesperson, it was I think there was a finance person. Not one of those people knew how to hold the controller, right? So they had shipped games and had made millions of dollars, and it was, to them, it was just a box. And so, like, no one ever played any of the games. They put it in the box and they sold it.
Yeah.
And so they literally joked and they said, you're you're the first person here that can actually play one of these things. Like, please start playing.
You're like a wizard to them.
Yeah, I mean, and there, I think there was a movie, The Wizard, right?
Yeah.
So like one of the first jobs I had was somebody walked in and handed me a box of Japanese NES, Famicom games, and said, "Hey, can you play all of these?" It was like 50 games or something, and I was like, "Okay, sure." Like, here we go. And this is work. Like, wow, work is easier than I thought. I thought like having a job meant like, you get tired at the end of the day. I didn't want to go home. I just thought this is the grind. I gotta go to work. There's 34 more games I have to play. And, like all of my friends were in, like they had gone to college and had gone to, got real jobs. And I remember a couple of my friends from high school worked on Wall Street, and they would come to the office and they just were like, it was like another universe to them. Like imagine they worked in an office where you had to put 50 cents in a cup when you took a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a sign up that was like, please do not mix the hazelnut with the regular coffee. It was like a whole different world. So yeah, I mean, it was like, I guess, what 18-year-old kid wouldn't want to work in video games, and they offered me a job and I had no choice. and I think a couple of years in, I realized that like there was nothing else I could do, but why would you ever not want to do this? At Acclaim, the first game I worked on was Rambo, and Rambo was like a text heavy. It was a side scroller, but kind of like a light RPG. But it was really text heavy, and it was all in Japanese. But like we were just kids. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. So the Japanese team would translate the game into English, and they would send it to us. And it was the most god awful, like bastardization of the English language ever, right? Because they didn't really speak English.
Yeah.
And so then 18-year-old Mike, who had failed English in high school 7 times, would go through, and they would fax us, and please, people, if you don't know what a fax machine is, look it up. They would fax us the text because there was no email, there was no, there was no way to get it to us. So they would fax us this horrible printout of the text, and I would go through with a pen and write on the fax. I'd correct it and then fax it back to them. And I mean, we must have gone through like 6 rounds because of all the typos and like trying to read the faxes and things. I still to this day, I'm not sure, if that Rambo game is like grammatically correct or, because like, what do I know? But that's the first thing I worked on. And then, over the years, I worked on all the Simpsons games that came out of Acclaim, like up until, 16-bit when I left, and all the Midway arcade games. We had like a 10-year deal with Midway for everything. So like, Arch Rivals and Narc, Terminator 2, things like that. And I worked on Judge Dredd, which I left before it shipped. I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm missing something big that I worked on. The Ferrari game that was developed in the UK by System 3. And there was also a Ferrari game that was like a Genesis Ferrari game that came out of Japan, I think. I did a lot of the anything that was like from Japan, I would do. For some reason, the guys in our Japanese office liked me, and like I guess because they could call me late at night, and so like anything to do with them, I would deal with. And but Acclaim was like you do a lot of stuff. We would. Like one game, and it's different. It's different now. There's only like 3 hardware platforms, but back then, one game you'd have like Simpsons, and there'd be like 9 versions of it.
Yeah.
Because it was like Master System, and I can't remember what it was called. Game Gear, NES, SNES, Genesis, by the time you were done, there were like 8 different things. God, I can't even think of some of them.
It looks like you had a brief stint on the Sega CD with you had like Frankenstein, the Dracula game, one of the WWF games as well. Looks like, was that for Sony Image Soft?
Well, no, my last project at Acclaim. So that was the other thing I did, is all the WWF games.
Yeah.
Which is called WWE now, but in my head it's still WWF.
Yeah.
So the first NES WWF was developed by Rare, who were not like a big deal back then. Like, Rare eventually became like, well, in my mind, one of the best, most famous game developers in the world. And they did a lot of work for hire for Acclaim. So they did this wrestling game for us, and none of them knew what wrestling was. And so the game they delivered to us was punching, kicking, and you'd knock the guy down, and the referee would come out and do like a 10 count. And we were like, no, that's kind of like kickboxing. And we had a big fight with them because they were like, no, this is correct. And we're like, yeah, no, the WWF is not going to approve this because it's, you need to have grappling and, pinning and all. So that was, and then we did the 16-bit versions with Sculptured in Utah, who were a fantastic developer, who also did Mortal Kombat. And then we took that, this basically like the Genesis WWF, and we kind of ported that to Sega CD. So it was kind of like the same game. I think we had more characters, and then we had little video intros for each character. But the Sega CD, like, you couldn't do full screen video. So the little video intros ran like in a tiny little box in the center of the screen. And I left, I think, either right as that shipped or right before that shipped. And then the Frankenstein No Escape. So I left Acclaim and I went to Sony. And I was so excited to go to Sony, and I was like, PlayStation, yeah, like I'm going to work on this new hardware. And I show up on the first day and I'm like, okay, guys, like, what am I doing? And they handed me a bunch of Sega CD games, and they're like, oh yeah, somebody like, quit, and he had these projects. Can you please handle these? And I was like, oh. And those were all developed by Psygnosis, who had just gotten bought by Sony, and it was like a very contentious relationship. And so like every day it was just like writing nasty emails back and forth. And one of them, so then like Sega CD died. I spent like a year on these 2 games, and No Escape never shipped. And Frankenstein was they both were finished and approved. And Frankenstein they put into a 2-pack with Dracula. It was like the game, just the market had died or whatever, and they were like, well, maybe if we make a 2-pack, it'll sell. So that at least got released, but that's a year and a half I was at Sony ImageSoft. That was all I did. And then I was, I think, a little frustrated that I wasn't working on PlayStation, and then an opportunity came to go to Fox, so I just jumped.
And you did get to work on PlayStation there. You got, Die Hard Trilogy. That's a game that I think that was one of the first few games I played on PlayStation from memory. That's a great game, especially the light gun sections in that. I really enjoy those. I mean, your resume from Fox is a big one.
I mean, probably like 80% of my time at Fox was Die Hard, right? It was such a big game. Like, I mean, just big in terms of it was good, and we knew it was going to sell. So, and then, maybe, I don't know, some part of my time on Independence Day. And that was kind of neat because they were filming it in LA, and, I met Dean and I met Will Smith a bunch of times.
Nice.
And I just, my most Hollywood kind of experience was right around the corner from my house. There are these, it's the old Hughes aircraft hangars from like, that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, right? And they had these massive hangars that were for like these planes. I don't know, like the giant planes they had. And all those hangars had become essentially, movie sets. and they shot so many movies down there, like just like in the middle of the swamp in the marina. And so I remember going down there, like, hey, go to this address. It's, where Dean's office is. And Dean was like, hey, do you want to, we're shooting. You want to go check it out? I was like, sure. And in one of these, the hangars, they had the entire Area 51 set. If you saw the movie Independence Day.
Mhm.
And in the middle of Area 51 is the ship, right? They have this alien ship. And so they had a 1-to-1 size model of this alien ship in the middle of this hangar. It was like literally I walked into Area 51 and it's like, oh shit, there's really alien ships here.
Yeah.
And that was pretty neat.
I saw that movie on TV the other day, so it's fresh in my mind what you're talking about. Yeah, that must have been pretty mind-blowing.
It was not a movie that won a lot of awards for its script, but I think it was very successful just because it was like a Will Smith action movie and it was fun. I mean, it's like Will Smith, and this is like one of his first movies, if not his first. And he's a great actor, and he does the kind of comedic action stuff really well. And in the meantime, we made a game, and it's the kind of, unfortunately, the typical thing where you're making a game, but you're trying to hit the release of the movie. So it's like, all right, guys, we've got to make a game in 11 months,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that doesn't necessarily give you a high quality game. And but we did it, and it sold a lot because of the movie. And there's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a story that when you sold I think it was 500,000 units, then you were eligible for greatest hits.
Yeah.
Which was like a lower royalty and a different package, right?
Yeah.
I think in the US it had a green stripe on the side.
Cheaper, weren't they?
Yeah, like usually it would go, the greatest hits would come out and it would be like $29 or something instead of, $40 or $59. And the story was that Sony called us and said, you're eligible for greatest hits, but we would really rather you not do it. Like, it's just such a bad game.
Wow.
And I think they said to us, but we'll let you do, we're going to give you something else. I don't know what the story was, but it was like, let's make a deal. Like, we'll give you greatest hits on, The Simpsons or something else. And I don't know if that happened or not, but definitely they acknowledged that it was not a very good game. So, and it wasn't. I mean, it was, but that's what happens when you try and make a game in 11 months. Die Hard had a unique situation that there was no movie. Right, the movies would all come out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not under that time pressure to hit the release date.
There was no time pressure. And what they would say to me constantly, they'd say, just make it a good game. I'd say, well, we need another 6 months. They're like, sure, whatever, we don't care. It was one of our first games as the new Fox Interactive, and they wanted it to be good. They wanted it to sell, millions, which it did. And so just, we just would go and just add stuff. And there was no time for, the developer, Probe, didn't get any extra money. They were just working off the original deal. And there was, I think, an extra year of work. And I was always surprised they didn't call us and ask for more money. But then we just kept polishing. We just, polish. And there was no deadline because there was no movie coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
The third movie had come out already. And so, the result was that the game was amazing.
Yeah.
And, you said the light gun, as a producer on the publisher side, right? I didn't have massive day-to-day, contribution to the team, right? Because mostly I was dealing with marketing and PR and things like that. But probably the one thing that I was really, I loved supporting different peripherals. So, the driving section supports the wheels and the NedgeCon, and the shooting section, like you said, the light gun, which we put there was a lot of time put into supporting that light gun, and the mouse. I think it's one of 3 PlayStation games that supports the PlayStation mouse.
So we love a good obscure peripheral on a game, so that's awesome. Yeah. Well, how did you transition then from Fox into Crave? Like, how did that move come about?
Yeah, so I mean, I was at Activision for a year. Activision had recruited me to work on Battlezone.
Ah, yes, yeah.
I did, so I produced Battlezone. Battlezone was done, and basically everyone on the team left to found Pandemic. And I was sitting there at like Activision HQ, and it was the building was almost empty. It was kind of funny. All of the dev teams spun out into Pandemic, into Savage. I think there was another one that I can't think of, and Activision didn't want to have internal development anymore. And then there was talk that like there was going to be a Battlezone expansion, but like I wasn't very good. And so, like there was no way I was going to go with the Pandemic guys. I was like, I want to stay on the publishing side or go back to the publishing side. So I'm sitting there doing, I was doing patches and working on, there was this thing at the end of a game at Activision where you would make an asset kind of pack. And it was all you burn CDs of all the assets, all the source assets, everything. It was like, 20 CDs we'd burn, and you'd put it in a box with documentation and stuff. And the joke was that, people at the end of the project would try to drag that out for months because it was an easy ride,
Yeah.
And so I think we spent 6 months like zipping up the asset pack. And then we were doing a deal with Crave for console rights to Battlezone. And I'd never heard of Crave. I had no idea who they were. And the biz dev guy was like, you should go talk to them. They're looking for production people. And I thought they were in Seattle. So I was like, no, they're in Seattle. Like, I'm not really interested. And at some point I realized that they were in LA and that they had a studio in Seattle. And I was like, oh shit, like, can you make an introduction? And that, it was one of those things where once again, just like Acclaim, they had one guy who was a sales guy, and he was running development, and they had a marketing woman, Jane, who had come out of Virgin, and that was it. And I was like, there's no production staff. I was like, oh shit, like this is perfect for me. And so yeah, they hired me as to run external production. They had an internal team in Seattle that was not doing anything really good. And so all, for I don't know, a couple of years, like basically everything Crave did was kind of under me. And I think we started with some PlayStation 1 games, and it was a combination of pickups and stuff that we put into development, a lot of licensed stuff. And then like right around there, Dreamcast popped up. And, I think that the philosophy at Crave was always to jump on new things. So we jumped pretty heavily into Dreamcast.
So I take it the complexities of prior development on the Saturn. I know Die Hard Arcade and Independence Day, I think, were part of that scope. I imagine it was kind of refreshing to come to a Sega console that was comparatively easier to develop for.
I mean, Saturn was a nightmare, and it was like, I think on paper, I think Jez, our co-founder, in one of the interviews recently was talking about how Saturn was more powerful than PlayStation. And I think on paper it was because there were like 9 different, processors that you could code for. But like in the real world, you'd sit down and you'd start to write your game engine for Saturn, and you'd say like, well, there's 2 CPUs, but you have to do this extra work to make them work together.
Mm.
You know what? We're just going to use one of them. You know, it was like there goes 50% of your horsepower. Like goodbye. And so, you know, in the real world, Saturn was harder. I mean, it was either easier if you just didn't do half the shit, or it was harder if you really tried to make an engine that used, you know, 99% of the power of the hardware. But it was never, you know, none of the developers ever called me up and said, "Oh, we love this hardware. Let's do another one."
Yeah.
It would always be like, "Can we do PlayStation next time, please?" Like, so, and I, you know, I only worked on, I think, 3 Saturn games. But yeah, when Dreamcast came out and they were like, it's Windows, you know, they're like, it's so easy, it's Windows. And I think, you know, a lot of developers were like, oh, thank God, like, you know, it was very familiar on the hardware side, right? It was like one CPU, a GPU that people knew about already, and there was nothing, I want to say innovative, like with air quotes, but, you know, in the Saturn kind of innovation way. Like Saturn, you know, was like a bunch of engineers, just like hardware, just fantasies. They were like, what if we had 3, you know, things that all work together, and only the crown princes of England will know how to work this shit, you know? And then I think, you know, Dreamcast, they were like, you know, what if we made something that works like a PC? You know, like what, this will be easier. So yeah, I mean, I think that, like, most of the developers we worked with were very happy with the Dreamcast. So, and by the way, I said it was PC, or I said it was Windows. Just like it actually had a Microsoft Windows logo on that. I'm sure there was like
the Windows CE.
Yeah, the CE.
Yeah,
Windows CE. It was actually, I mean, most games didn't use that. I don't know if any of the games I worked on actually used that. It was you had a choice. You could basically program to the metal, or you could use this Windows development environment that probably gave you like half the horsepower, but it was very easy to develop for. So
from interviews I've read, yeah, the Windows CE part of the, you know, Dreamcast development wasn't the best, shall we say. I don't know if you've heard the same, Brian.
Yeah. From what I've heard, it was very easy to get something operating on it, but a little more difficult to optimize.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, you had this other. The problem was you had this other layer. You were working through this like deep API that, you know, abstracted everything, and you know, game development has always been about, you know, even on like NES, hey, how could I get one more sprite on the screen? You know, how could I get one more millisecond? And, you know, you would always see on every piece of hardware, right? Like over the life cycle of, like, say, PlayStation, you know, by the end of the life cycle, games looked 10 times better than the first games on that hardware. Dreamcast, you know, you had towards the end, it's some amazing looking stuff as people would try to get that, you know, one more, can we get 1 more %, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even today we've recently had Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City ported to the console, so it definitely, you know, packed a punch, but unfortunately, due to the financial reasons, a lot of those games never came to the console. But yeah, anyway, I digress. I wanted to just list the games that you have credits on, Mike, because there's quite a lot of fantastic games that a lot of Dreamcast fans love to this day. So I'll just quickly reel them off, and then obviously after that, just feel free to share away all your anecdotes about whichever ones you want to speak about. So the first game we've got you listed on is AeroWings in 1999. After that, we've got Tokyo Xtreme Racer, or Tokyo Highway Challenge if you're based in Europe. Draconus Cult of the Wyrm, that was 2000. Super Magnetic Neo, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2, UFC, StarLancer, Snowcross, Championship Racing, Soldier of Fortune, and then finally we've got Razor Freestyle Scooter. That was the last Dreamcast game we've got you noted down against, although Crave did publish quite a few others, but these were the ones you were specifically an executive producer on.
Yeah, and it's funny you went through the list, like, you know, I think I forgot about half of those. So thanks for the reminder. I mean, I was about to say which was my favorite, and then I switched in my head like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
Because really, honestly, of all the games I've worked on in my career, I think some of my favorites were the Dreamcast games. And, you know, Tokyo Xtreme Racer, That was I had played the PlayStation 1 game and was a huge fan. Like I think I played like a Japanese import and was just like, oh, this is just so neat, like upgrading the car and all that. And but it's you race on these 2-lane highways, and I always thought that was really weird. When I was playing on PlayStation, I had no idea that was a real thing. I'd never been to Japan. I didn't know about the Tokyo highways and all that. So we had an opportunity. We went to Japan, and the head of development at Crave really liked Japan. And so we'd go there. We'd go to like Tokyo Game Show, and we met Genki. And like just I mean, if it was up to him, every game, all of our development would have been in Japan, right? He was like, oh, Japanese developers are the best. And so we met Genki, and they had that game, and they were like, hey, we have this on Dreamcast. And I was like, oh, I played the PlayStation, like, look, come on, we got to do this. Like, and it was probably one of the best looking Dreamcast games at the time. And, it was pretty neat to work on. It was an existing game at that point. Like they were close to being finished. So I didn't really have much input. In fact, I think I tried, and they just like to say no a lot. And I think Japanese developers are a little bit stubborn, and they develop those games. It's like a little bit different than the UK and the UK developers. They develop those games for the Japanese market, and they don't care about the rest of the world. Like they can make, like, their business model, right, is like to sell their games in Japan. And then when we come along, they just see us as like, oh, look at that. We can make a little money. We'll ship this game in the US, right? But in a lot of cases, it almost felt like that that we were an inconvenience for them. Like, oh, you guys are bothering us again. Like, so, but I wrote most of the English text for that game because I'm a car nerd, so I knew what most of the stuff was. And in a few cases, they'd have Japanese terms for things, and I didn't understand. And we had a little partnership with HKS for some of the parts. And I remember calling them up. There was a guy over there, and I called him, hey, do you know what this is? What's a pillow ball suspension? And the guy was like, oh yeah, like we don't really use that term here. Like that's a Japanese thing, So yeah, so I went. It was just like Rambo all over again, except this time we had email, so I could email them the text. But the other thing we did was we in LA they have this huge import car kind of culture, and people love Japanese cars and they love modifying cars. And they had this event that was like once a month called Hot Import Nights, and it was basically like a car show for modded, Japanese cars. And we did a deal with a magazine. It was called Import Tuner Magazine.
I was going to say, I noticed that specifically on the front cover of the US version. It's not on the PAL version, but yeah, Import Tuner presents Tokyo Xtreme Racer.
Yeah, and that deal basically, like, they did like a little co-marketing with us, and we got, basically the deal was that I got like a little table in their booth at all the trade shows they went to. And so, and here I was like a kind of, video game nerd, car nerd, and I'd go to all these, the Hot Import Nights was basically cars and scantily clad women. So, years later, there was all this hoopla about E3 and booth babes, right? I don't know if you remember any of that. They were like, we must ban the booth babes. But, like the car shows in LA, it was almost like a contest for, like how the women could wear the least amount of clothes. And so, I was a young kid, so I enjoyed the hell out of it. But the cool thing was, to bring this back to games, the cool thing was really watching people come up and play the game. Like, this is, pre-release, and they'd come up and play, and people loved it, because again, this was the audience, was like, car nerds. And it was funny to me because in America we have a big culture around drag racing, which is a quarter mile. I don't know what that is in British terms. And so everyone would come up and they would play the game and they would say, oh, how do I drag race? And we're like, oh, it doesn't have that, but there was a split screen mode. And so I'd see like a kid would come up with his friend and they would like stop on the highway next to each other. And then they would count down and they would drag race. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So, I went back to Japan. I was like, hey, we really need to add drag racing. Like, people really want to do this. And they were like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. So, like I said, Japanese developers are a little stubborn.
I mean, Tokyo Xtreme Racer, I'd like to say that was one of the first, not one of the first, obviously there was others in the series before that had come to the West, but that was quite an early example of, what became quite a big genre, like Need for Speed, The Underground, and obviously Fast and Furious, these films, of like tuning cars and that kind of culture. So this was almost like an early kind of example for us in the West, and then obviously everyone watched Tokyo Drift, the Fast and Furious film,
Sure.
and it was everywhere. So
I honestly, I think I could be wrong. Please put it in the comments if I'm wrong. But I think that was probably the first of those kind of RPG like, no, well, there's Gran Turismo. Okay, but other than Gran Turismo, I think it was probably one of the first of those kind of RPG style racing games, right? Because it was all about you'd race, you'd earn money, and you'd spend the money to buy better cars, to buy better parts, and it was an incredibly deep game. I mean, it would take you hundreds of hours to beat all the bosses because there were 500 bosses and they had these crazy requirements, like you needed a car with 25,000 miles on the odometer, and then the boss would come out and fight you. And it was like, so and our QA guys, I mean, I think they did them all. I think it may have taken them months to do it, but they were just, we had a list from Genki, right? So at least they knew what they were doing. But yeah, I mean, that was an amazing game to work on. And probably the other one that I really enjoyed was Draconus, which was actually Die by the Sword 2.
yes.
And Die by the Sword was this great, kind of indie PC game where you use the mouse to control the sword hand. So it was like this full kinematic system where you could just swipe your sword, in any way. And they were making a Dreamcast game, and for some reason I think Interplay didn't want to do Dreamcast. And Interplay was like right down the corner, I say right around down the street from us, but they actually weren't. They were in Orange County. So, but the owner of Crave and Brian Fargo were really good friends, and so like if they didn't want a game, they would call us and we would take it. So we were doing that, and it was really early in development, and that was Treyarch's second game, right? Treyarch, who went on to do so many great things.
Huge with Call of Duty eventually, weren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's today. If Treyarch does kind of exist, it's not the same Treyarch, but they're one of the 3 Call of Duty teams. So, and they were just in this little office. It was like 6 or 7 people in this little office. And, I'd go down there and hang out with them, and they were super cool guys. And it was a great game. I mean, so many kind of things in that game that were, ahead of its time. And I wish we could have like continued that franchise. It's like it was this kind of like felt like an open world RPG, and we had George Takei was the voice of the elf, and it was the development was really tough, but because we tried, I think they were very ambitious. It's common for game development, right? It's like, you try to do maybe we tried to do like 2 or 3 too many things. And graphically, I think they were fighting frame rate a lot because we just tried to make the world so nice and so beautiful. But that was a great game to work on. And I was definitely on the side of trying to, just to name it its real name, which was Die by the Sword 2. But, the marketing guys jumped in and they were like, oh, nobody knows what that is. We need a new name. Draconus. I was like, well, nobody knows what that is either. So what's the point, I will tell you one funny story is that there was a note on there about Draconus, Cult of the Wyrm, which was, and you had the European name.
Yeah, Dragon's Blood, yeah.
Dragon's Blood, and I saw that on there, and I was like, Dragon's Blood? What the fuck is Dragon's Blood? And I went and looked it up. And, I mean, this is like a Mandela effect, like pure 100%. And I looked it up, and it says it's true, but I have no recollection.
I've got it on my shelf right next to me. Yeah,
really?
Blood,
I literally don't believe you.
I'll have to send a photo by email after this. Yeah.
My recollection, which is obviously not true, is that they had named it. The original name was Die by the Sword 2.
Mm-hmm.
And my recollection was that the Europeans called it that. And so when I saw that yesterday, and I just was staring at it going, this isn't true. Like, these guys have made a horrible mistake. Like, somebody played a joke and changed the Wikipedia page. Like, and I still need to like reach out to the guy who was the producer, Chris, and say, like, have you ever heard of this? Like, is this a thing?
Just for the listeners, on these games, you're credited as an executive producer. I presume that role changed depending on the game, but what would you define that as to our listeners? Like, what was your role being an executive producer?
Yeah, so like, at Fox, I was a producer, and then I think at Sony, maybe I was a senior producer. And like, so the way it works in games, obviously, a producer is a guy who manages game development. And then like usually a senior producer, it's really just like a better title, right? Like, okay, you've been here longer or whatever. Sometimes, maybe in some companies, a senior producer might have more people under them. And then an executive producer usually is like a producer who manages other producers. So at Crave, I think I had 3 or 4 producers that worked for me. And so if I looked at the credits, for like Draconus, I think I'm credited as an executive producer. And so I think for like the first half of the project, I was the producer. And I think that we hired a guy named Jeff Barnhart, and he came on at some point. I don't want to take credit away from Jeff. I think towards the middle, and he became the day-to-day producer, and then I just kind of became his boss. I do think like there are some companies where an EP doesn't like do any game development work, but then I think there's also plenty of situations where, like in my case, I was still very involved, right?
Yeah.
Jeff might have gone to Treyarch without me, but I also think there were probably plenty of times that we would go together and I would still like add my feedback, On Tokyo Xtreme Racer, I didn't assign a producer because I was like, no, that's mine. Right?
Yeah. I'm
like, it's a game about, and like, just to put it in perspective, like I drove my car at the time was a 3rd generation RX-7, which I think is on the cover of one of the packages. It may have been a picture of my car actually. And so, yeah, I mean, it was just like I exerted executive privilege and said, I'm going to produce this game, right? There may have been in the credits, there may have been a producer on the second one. I'm not sure. And I think there was one other game, if I think about it, that I was the sole producer. And that would be, like I said, it would, when we would divvy up who was going to work on what, I think it would be like, oh, Jeff, you have 2 projects, so I won't give you a third. I'll just manage it myself. Maybe at the end, I'm trying to think of what was the last, the Razor Scooter game.
Yeah.
But I think there was still a producer that worked for me on that. And that was a really interesting project. Like, well, okay, so Razor Scooter started as PlayStation, and somebody came to me and said, we want to make a 1999 PlayStation game. So you get like a $200,000 budget for development. And we were talking to Shaba, who had done a game called Grind Session for Sony. It was a first-party skateboarding game that was like as good as Tony Hawk, if not better.
It's a good game. They actually went on to work on Tony Hawk eventually as well on some ports. So, yeah.
Right. So we went to them and said, hey, can you make a Razor scooter game? And they said, well, we've got the skateboarding engine. We'll just take all the features out, and like slim it down. And they made that game in 2 months. And, so it's obviously like there were only 4 characters. There was only, I think, 2 or 3 environments. But it was great. And if you ever want to laugh, there's an intro, the credit sequence, excuse me. The credit sequence is like 3 of the guys put on
the animal costumes
suits. Yeah. and they had some like award-winning, video director who's friends of theirs, or one of them, I don't know, filmed this thing like driving around San Francisco on scooters. And I think it was like the alligator was chasing one of the bunny or something.
Yeah,
and
bunny and a bear, I think.
This whimsical music. There's no dialogue. It's all just done, through the video. And it's like this 8-minute video with the credits rolled over. And I swear we used to joke, I think they spent more, time and money on the video than the actual game. But there's a guy, and it all comes around. There's a guy that I'd met in Australia. I didn't meet him in Australia. I would download Dreamcast games, like there were lots of like there were homebrew games and things like that, and I would download demos and stuff. And there was a port of Quake 1 on Dreamcast, so I pulled this thing down and started playing it. I was like, oh, this is an amazing port, and it had the guy's name and like phone number on the title screen. And so I called him up and I was like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, yeah, I just did that. It was like a hobby project. I was like, oh, do you want to do like real, game development for me, please? And so I ended up hiring him to port that scooter game to Dreamcast.
Wow.
Which he did as like a solo project. And people were like patting me on the back for getting it done so cheap. And so he and I stayed in touch, and we ended up doing a bunch of projects together post Crave. He went to EA for a few years and was a tech director on all the Madden games. Then he came back, and we ended up working together on Oddworld Soulstorm as the tech director on that for me. And he now basically is developing all of Argonauts games. So,
wow,
super smart guy, like who ported games to Dreamcast for fun.
I noticed you did keep up that relationship with Genki and also Treyarch, because you obviously have Super Magnetic Neo, Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That the Dreamcast port was by Treyarch.
By Treyarch, yeah. Yeah, I mean, basically what happened was just as Draconus was finishing up, and we had a good relationship with Activision, right? Again, they were like, our neighbors in LA. And I remember they handed me a thing, like a CD case with like 8 different discs. And they were like, play all of these and see if you want to license any of these from us. And it was like Apocalypse, Tony Hawk. Gosh, I can't remember what the other, Vigilante 8. There was a handful of games in there. And they were not doing Dreamcast. So it was like, which of these would you want for Dreamcast? And I played Tony Hawk, for like 5-10 minutes. And I said, hey, this is a good game. Like, I don't skateboard. I don't know anything about skateboarding. I do have 2 skateboards behind me now, but which I can't ride because I would fall and die. But
that's half the fun.
it's I actually every year at Xbox at GDC, if you see Chris Charla at GDC, he'll give you a ticket, and you go to the booth and you trade the ticket for the official Xbox skateboard that year.
Oh, cool.
And I got one, and I was on the plane with the skateboard on my shoulder, right? Because how else do you bring it home? And I was so like excited, like I can't ride this thing, but I feel cool now. And so I gave it to my daughter, who's like 10 or something at the time, and she parked it right outside my office. So I walked out of my office, stepped on the skateboard. It was like a cartoon. I flew up in the air, landed on my shoulder, and like my right shoulder is now like 50%. 5 years later.
Oh no!
So whenever I see Chris Charla, I'm like, yeah, so I have a torn rotator cuff thanks to you, and that damn skateboard. Anyway, so we were like, let's port this to Dreamcast, and we had no idea. Like, this is 6 months before the game came out. It was an early build, so we went, and like I just was like, hey, you know what? These guys know Dreamcast. Let's talk to them. And that's a lot of how you would choose game development back in those days. Like, you would just say like Mortal Kombat, Sculptured Software had done the wrestling games for me. And so they were saying, oh, we're going to port Mortal Kombat. And I was like, hey, you should talk to Sculptured. Like, they know Genesis, why not? So Treyarch, they were like, okay, sounds great. Like, we'll do it. And in the middle of all that, the game blew up.
Yeah.
And it became this, I remember they had released a demo on like PlayStation Magazine, and there was a high score contest. And one guy in the office is a guy named Rich, who still works with me now and then. And Rich played it. Rich was the best game player I've ever met in my life. Like, he was a prodigy with anything with a controller. And Rich played it and like blew away whatever was the high score at the time. He just like completely like demolished it. And he was playing that demo at lunch, and then during the rest of the day he was testing the Dreamcast version. So and Treyarch did a great job.
They did, yeah. It's a great port.
Yeah, they upgraded all the, we upgraded the graphics, we upgraded the models, like and then like I said, it kind of blew up a little bit, and then we were like feeling pretty good about that. And I remember there was Mitch Lasky, who was one of the executives at Activision, did a magazine article, and he was quoted as saying something like, we never should have done that deal. Like, we're going to try to get that back from them.
The rumor we've heard is that Activision, they put out Blue Stinger as a release game for the console, and then they were so burnt off that whatever happened with Blue Stinger had made them try and distance themselves from the console. I don't know if there's any truth behind that.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Blue Stinger. Like, that's actually the first, although developed by Climax Graphics. Okay, yeah, I don't know this game, but I believe that they just were not really like interested in Dreamcast. It just, I mean, Dreamcast never really like was big enough for them.
Yeah.
But they had offered us all of their games for Dreamcast, and by some crazy like lucky coincidence, we took Tony Hawk, and it was a huge hit. And then then they immediately went and hired Treyarch to do Tony Hawk 2. And I think, that led to Treyarch doing the Spider-Man games and getting acquired. And so I will, whenever I get a chance, when I see the two guys that I know that were the founders of Treyarch, I'll always remind them of that, and usually that gets them to pay for lunch. I was kind of bummed that we didn't do Tony Hawk 2 because, at that point Activision was like, oh, wait a minute, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then that they did eventually do Dreamcast.
Yeah, they did Spider-Man.
They did Spider-Man, yeah.
Yeah. But I think they were just like, oh, there's gold in those hills, so we might as well.
I mean, Tony Hawk was it was Tony Hawk. It's like a cultural phenomenon.
Well, that was the thing. And they saw how much money we made. And like I said, there was this Mitch Lasky thing where he was like, that was a big mistake. We never should have given that to them, which was kind of shitty because it was like we were partners with them. Like, you're not supposed to talk shit about your partners. Like, it's not like we screwed them. It was like,
yeah,
they came to us. So But yeah, no, I mean, like, I can't skateboard, but that is definitely one of my top 10 favorite games. So,
Do you think that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was probably the best-selling release for Crave on Dreamcast, or I don't know, even maybe on any console, possibly?
it was probably one of Crave's best-selling Dreamcast games, if not the best-selling Dreamcast game. I mean, definitely, like, Tony Hawk on PlayStation was, like a top 10 game. But Dreamcast, unfortunately, was a there just were not enough Dreamcasts sold. It was kind of a soft market. So, best selling on Dreamcast might have been 100,000 units.
Yeah.
So, Tokyo Xtreme Racer probably did really well. Actually, probably UFC might have done more units than Tony Hawk, to be honest. I mean, UFC was highly rated and critically acclaimed and just a great game.
It's not one I've played, actually. Have you played that one, Brian?
I have. I remember when the demo came out. Also, I think there's maybe a bit of a trend with the timing of some of these releases, because that kind of mid-summer lull of 2000 was when a few of these, I think, came out with Tony Hawk and UFC, and I think it was probably a good time to avoid the static of all of the releases that would have been bunched up later in the fall.
I gotta say, I'm really surprised that you just said you never played the UFC game, because I mean, it probably was one of the best Dreamcast games, and maybe because it's UFC, it's fighting, maybe it's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I know at some point there was one award that we had for like best fighting game on Dreamcast, and it really is like what I was talking before about how there's easy ways to do things, and then there's like developers that really want to get like 99.9% of the power out of the system. These guys, that was the world they lived in, was like trying to squeeze out every bit of performance out of the hardware. And it is a really good looking game.
Yeah, I was playing it earlier this week as well. And what strikes me is how easy it is to get into, as far as the controls being fairly simple, where you just have your punches and kicks and on your left and right all fit map to the face buttons. But there's like another layer of the grappling, and then what you do when you're on the mat, and there's a whole other system of counters and things you can kind of dig into that just give you a lot to play with there. And yeah, I think it holds up really well, actually.
And we're really lucky, like, my whole story about Rare not understanding, wrestling. And then, UFC was developed by a team in Japan called Anchor. And we met them through, like, we had an agent in Japan that would take us around to meet developers. And they were an arcade fighting game team. They were a small team, I don't know, like 8-10 people, something like that. But they had just shipped an arcade game. I've never seen it since. I think it was called Toy Fighters. And it was this...
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yeah.
I mean, in Japan, when we go to arcades, most of what you would see is people playing fighting games. You would see just like there would be like a row of Street Fighters. Like it would be like 20 Street Fighters in a row, people sitting playing them. God, I can't even think of what would be like the top fighting game back then, King of Fighters or something like that. And it was like half the arcade was fighting games. So these guys had made that game, and we saw it, and we really liked it, and we said, hey, this is really nice. Can you do UFC? And also, mixed martial arts, and like UFC, but there were other MMA leagues that were popular in Japan. It was very big in Japan. So these guys, being a fighting game developer, they knew MMA, they knew UFC really well. And so, unlike the Rare experience, we didn't have to give them direction. Like, they knew you have to grapple, then you have to do a takedown, and then they knew the different ways. Like when you're doing ground fighting, right? You can be in the different kind of mounts, and the top mount, side mount. And if anyone is an MMA fan is listening to me talk, I sound like an idiot, but that's what you were talking about, right? Where you were saying how it's really easy to go from like one place to another in the game, and that's how MMA is. Like, you try to get a guy on the ground, then you get into like this mount, you try to get to that mount, and then you try to like ultimately get into the position where you have the guy locked up in a place where he has to tap out. And they just did a great job. I mean, they wanted zero feedback from us. We'd go into meetings with them, and they would just basically say no to everything. And we would just walk out. There's a guy named Jeff Barnhart I mentioned before. He was the producer that worked for me on that. And we'd walk out of the meetings, and he would look at me and go like, "What the fuck just happened?" And I was like, "Dude, we're in Japan. Like this is, they play by their rules." And look, the good news was that they were good. And as much as we didn't like telling them to change something and they would say no, but at least they delivered a decent game. It's probably the one place where that's not true is that Jeff wrote a career mode, right? We didn't want an arcade game. We wanted something deeper, like where you build your character and then you fight and then you evolve, And he wrote this whole career mode thing, and they took a look at it and said, "Yeah, we're not doing that." And I think we negotiated them into like 25% of it, but we never got like the full career mode that he had envisioned. And I think when we went to like the second or third game, I think he finally got like a little more influence. I don't think it was Anchor that did those. I think we switched to another developer. Well, then that was the end of Dreamcast, right? So then then it was PlayStation, which was a different team, and then eventually PS2 was also a different team that did that.
It's interesting what you were saying there about how you'd speak to these developers and they'd just be like, "No, we're not doing that." Because one of the notes I actually have down for Super Magnetic Neo is that Super Magnetic Neo amongst our fan communities is notoriously difficult. I don't know if you've ever completed the game at all, Mike, but it is hard.
Oh, Jesus. I don't think I finished the first level. I mean, that game, I remember playing it and just going, "This is insane. It's weird. I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know why this guy has a magnet on his head." like this is such a Crave game. Like, we have to publish this. And we, again, like you said, we had a tight relationship with Genki, so it made sense. And I think there was another producer that took over that project just because I couldn't. I was like, "I don't know what's going on with this game. Like, good luck."
What is interesting is there's actually some difficulty changes in the Western versions from the Japanese version. So I just wondered if Crave had any kind of discussions there as to, like, please make this easier.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we absolutely knew that it was way too hard. And I think even with the difficulty changes we made, I think it was still way too hard.
Yeah.
But there's only so much you can do, and we go through this kind of thing all the time. Like, how do you make a game easier? If you have to jump across a platform and you fall and die, how do you make that easier? So, but I think we did absolutely beg them to make it easier, and I think they did do a few changes for us, which is great.
So it would have been Genki themselves who would have changed that. It wouldn't have been someone at Crave. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We would have written emails, asking nicely. And we had a Japanese, well, he wasn't Japanese. We had this guy, Daryl, who had lived in Japan, gone to college in Japan, and happened to speak fluent Japanese. And we go into meetings, and he would just sit there, and they would all be speaking to each other in Japanese, like between our talking. And he would just sit there smiling. And he was like 6'3", 280-pound black guy. And he was the one guy in the room that they would never imagine spoke Japanese. And he'd wait like a half an hour, and then he would turn to one of the guys and just start speaking fluent Japanese. And they would all immediately like drop their jaws, and they would go, "What the hell? Like, how do you speak Japanese?" And there was always a 5-minute discussion at that point, like, how is it you speak Japanese? Why do you speak Japanese? Why is your accent so good? And he's like, "Oh, I like went to college, in Tokyo or whatever." And so he was the guy that would have to write all the emails. We'd write it in English, and then he would send it to them. He would culturalize it. So like, if we were too demanding, he would tone it down, because the Japanese don't like that. Mm-hmm. And which reminds me, like, I got in trouble because the Japanese like decided they didn't like me during Tokyo Xtreme Racer, and they were mad. They were mad because I wanted to put my car in the game. But it was like the third generation RX-7 is like one of the most popular import performance cars. So it was like obvious, right? Like that game, you couldn't have the game. I mean, I think it was already in the game actually, now that I think about it, because that is like a very popular car to tune in Japan. And so I don't know why they were mad at me, but they were like, oh, he's so arrogant. He wanted his car. Maybe because I wanted my car on the. I said, put the RX-7 on the title screen or whatever, and they were like, they thought I was just doing that to be arrogant or something. So Daryl was the guy that would like try to soften things so that they wouldn't get pissed at us.
But it obviously worked because you went on to do the second game with them. So
the second game, and then we did PlayStation. I left, and then after I left, they did like Tokyo Drift and a couple of others. And but it's really funny. I went to Japan, and there was a Japanese guy that would go with us, and he would translate. So I'm sitting in this room with them, and I would ask a question. We wanted to add more cars. We really wanted them to add more stuff for the US version to make it more interesting. So I would say something like, can you ask them like, hey, we'd like to add 6 more cars. Can they do that for us? Now, they didn't want to do that because they had already spent money developing the game. And why would they spend more money if they didn't have to, right? What they wanted to do was just ship the existing game in English. So they would start speaking in Japanese, and it would go on, a couple of minutes would go by, and they were going back and forth in Japanese. And I was playing solitaire on my laptop, and 10 minutes would go by. And then Shinji, the Japanese guy that worked for us, he would turn to me and say, they said no.
It's like that scene from Lost in Translation.
Oh, when I saw that movie, I lived it. But I was like, dude, seriously, you guys just talked for 10 minutes. You got to tell me more than just no. Can you explain the thought process here? And I think we got them. I think they agreed to 5 cars. And, I think that because there were some Japanese cars that we had in America that were not like Japanese JDM models. And so there was like an Accord Coupe that was a really nice, I just loved it. I thought it was a really nice looking car. And I think there was the Mitsubishi Eclipse. I know those were the 2 that I campaigned for. And I think they had suggested a couple of others that they put in themselves. But the Eclipse was like a really popular tuner car and didn't exist in Japan for some strange reason.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much more complicated those discussions would have been if actual licensing was required. Because I think those first 2 games, or those, they didn't really have the official manufacturer licenses yet. Yeah. I think that would happen later on in the series.
I don't think Crave ever did that, and I may be wrong because it was after I left. But in Japan, they had the logos on the trunk lids of all the cars, and they were showing us. They're like, "Hey guys, look at how we've perfectly modeled the Honda logo." And we're like, "Yeah, take that off."
Yep.
They're like, "You can't fucking do that." Like, we will absolutely, because you could say like, and I don't think we use the word Accord or Prelude. We would say like the Mazda FD3S.
Yeah.
Right? So if
Marda
you were like,
or something. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were like into car tuning, you would know that there was an FC and an FD model RX-7. So like those things were common enough, but even if you didn't know, you would just have to figure it out. You'd play the game, whatever. So I don't think we ever said Mazda. I don't think we ever said, RX-7, because we knew that those were things we couldn't use. And there was always this, I think it was pretty risky legally, but most games would just kind of do that and get away with it. And we did an early, like we released, I don't know, on the magazine cover or something. There was the Acura, what's the...
NSX or something.
NSX. So there was an NSX on the cover of the box, and someone at Acura saw it, and we got a letter. And it basically said, we don't care if you use our car in your game, but you can't put it on the cover. So we actually had to change the cover art, right before we shipped. But that was it. That was the only trouble we ever had, was because we tried to put it on the cover, But we were smart enough to take the logos off. And I'm always surprised that, car companies are global. So I have no idea why Acura didn't notice that the Japanese version of the game had an Acura logo on the trunk lid, but I guess they didn't care. That's the only two instances at Crave where we had a copyright problem. The other was a game which was not Dreamcast, was a game called Global Operations, which was kind of a clone of Counter-Strike. And we had all the weapons. And weapons are like cars. It's the same thing. You just don't use the trademarks and they leave you alone. And someone had accidentally, and it slipped through, on the M4, which is like the U.S. military, the rifle that everybody uses. It used to be called the M16. Now it's the M4. They had scanned a real one, and it had a Colt logo, because it's the Colt M4, on the actual model of the gun. And someone from Colt saw that and said, they wrote us a letter and said, hey, that's our copyright. Can you please put this legal notice in the game? So, again, they didn't tell us to take it out. They just were like, you need to properly, provide the legal notice for our trademark. And we were like, oh, that's interesting. That's they didn't sue us. Weird. Okay. Cool. So, and it was only that one. It was literally was a mistake, because we were supposed to sanitize those things. You could call it the M4 because the M4 is the military designation, but it's technically the Colt, AR-15. And if we called it that, then there might have been a trademark thing. So
interesting. Yeah. Threading needles a bit. I'm curious how different that might be today. And
it depends on your lawyer.
How much more stringent those legal departments are.
Like at Argonaut, our lawyer is very, careful, and he'll say, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Right.
Yeah.
But at Crave, we just would just do it. We just didn't ask, and I think this is kind of almost fits in with a lot of other kind of game development philosophies, right? A lot of times you're just trying to just get stuff done, or just figure it out, or just, hey, if we tape these two things together, it looks like a cat, And so, it's just, Crave was pretty fast and loose. And I think that just represents kind of, it's like, what Elon Musk says, move fast and break things. I think that's kind of how we were at Crave, and we shipped a ton of games. I don't think anybody shipped as many Dreamcast games as we did.
So many great titles as well. That's the thing I want to say, is that it didn't seem like you guys were, just shipping any old rubbish. It was, really good quality releases as well.
We had a couple of those, by the way. There were a few dogs.
Is there any in particular that you'd think was the lower quality of the bunch?
I can't remember what it was called, but I think when PlayStation 2 launched, they were desperate for a launch title. And there was a game that came out of Japan, and I remember we played it in the office and said, this is the biggest piece of shit ever. But they were so desperate to ship a launch title. They're like, oh, it's launch title, it doesn't matter. And Sony rejected it. You had to submit your concept to Sony. And Sony was like, this game is very low quality. Please, here's feedback of why. Please do not address any of this feedback. We will not, even if you address all of these issues, we will not approve this title. It is so bad. It was like an on rails, like you were flying a spaceship, I think, in space. Okay, so here's the crazy thing, is that because of EU law, the thing was that in Europe, you didn't need concept approval the way you did in the US. Conceivable, anything you still had to submit it, but they could not reject it. They had to say yes. And so because of that, they're like, well, we'll just ship it in Europe. It's fine. So whatever this thing went, I'm blanking on the name, probably for good reason. But whatever it was, we shipped it in Europe, and it sold nothing. It was a disaster. We lost money. And it honestly was the worst game I was not the producer on it. Oh God, I hope they didn't put my name in the credits. But it was probably the worst game I've ever been like associated with in any way, shape, or form. It was just so awful.
To think about some of the best ones, I mean, I don't know how much you remember of it, but and I think that it was a partnership with Warthog and Digital Anvil, probably Warthog with the port
StarLancer.
Dreamcast for StarLancer, yeah.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to ask about that, Brian.
I have to. It's one of my favorite Dreamcast games. But, I'm really curious because this one, it does seem like a case where there would have, out of necessity, had to be pretty extensive adaptations especially with the controls, maybe some of the mission structure and other flourishes with the FMV video and all of that. And yeah, I was just kind of curious to pick your brain of what you recollect about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I do. When we port games, right, sometimes it's like a straight port. Like the Razor Scooter game was like port plus because we were going up from a lower platform to a higher platform. And StarLancer coming out of PC, it was definitely like, can you fit this 50 pounds of game into like a 40-pound console, right? And so I think that was a long development. I think it was like a year and a half because there was so much work that needed to be done. So Warthog, I feel like they maybe were involved in the original PC game. I can't remember. I know that like it was Digital Anvil was Chris Roberts and his brother Aaron. I think so. I think Aaron was the director or the leader of the StarLancer team, and I think that there was some association where like either he had worked with Warthog, they knew him really well, so they had like a really tight relationship directly with Digital Anvil. I think that was really helpful. But I do remember that there was a lot of engineering, like heavy lifting that had to happen for that project. And I'm not sure, like the PC game I don't think was a huge hit. God, I haven't even thought of that game in so long. I wonder if it's on Steam. And
I don't know. I feel like I would own it if it was.
It's not, which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get it on like an abandonware site or something. Or I guess I could just play the Dreamcast.
Looks like there's plenty of people lobbying for it on Good Old Games.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so that was a great game. I mean, that was definitely one of the better games, but probably didn't sell very well. And then what that led to was the next game I did with Warthog. So as soon as that wrapped up, then Warthog had pitched us this game called Mace Griffin Bounty Hunter. And it was very much like, hey, inspired by the work we did on StarLancer, but its own IP. And it was all the space stuff kind of from StarLancer, but then you would like dock and you'd get out of the ship and walk around. And again, the problem with that game was that they had designed like a 10-year game and, then tried to build it in 2 years. And it was just, the potential of that game was just so much bigger than what we had time for. But it could have been a great game.
Yeah, that seems to be a pretty common through line. Going back to like Freelancer and what's the one that's been ongoing, Star Citizen or whatever?
Star Citizen. Yeah, I mean, that's Chris Roberts. I mean, Chris is a kind of a genius. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he wants to make. The problem is what Chris needs is someone to keep him grounded. Like he needs a partner that. He was famous for Wing Commander, but he had this guy Mark Day that he worked with, and Mark Day was the guy who was like the horse trainer, right? That would or lion tamer, I should say. And so I've met Mark a bunch of times, and Mark used to do GDC talks about the Wing Commander experience. And Mark did this talk. It was about pre-production. And I remember we all went into the room going, pre-production, what's that? Obviously, like nowadays, there's a lot of pre-production. In Hollywood, there's a lot of pre-production. And it's like if you're going to cook, right, you have to get all your vegetables together, right? It's pre-production. And so we went into this talk, and at the end of it, I remember going, wow, this is really interesting ideas this guy has. Like, not realizing it wasn't ideas. It was just how you made bigger projects, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but Mark's thing was that he was able to keep Chris kind of under control. And I think that Star Citizen needs someone like that to kind of focus them. But, I think that was also, a bit of the problem with Mace Griffin was just that it needed to have a more realistic scope. And a lot of game development runs late because it's really easy to be optimistic.
Well, yeah, nevertheless, I just keep going back to StarLancer, and I think part of what made that a successful game and probably a really good Dreamcast game is how focused it was. I mean, it had a few side modes with the online play, but for the most part, it was a pretty strict mission structure, and I think that fit really well with both the Dreamcast capabilities and the ability to scale it from PC to work well on that.
Oh yeah, hey, I feel a little dumb here. Yeah, so actually the original PC game was developed by Warthog. So, and I'm looking at the names here. It looks like we actually had a couple of the PC guys on the Dreamcast team. So now it makes much more sense now. So yeah, and so I believe that our producer he had worked on the original PC game. So yeah, I mean, hey, the Metacritic was a 79, which is very respectable. IGN gave it an 8.8.
That's good.
Good. That's, by the way, 79, that's a great score. I wish I could get that every time.
I mean, I think that's probably the best score, really. If you think about the sweet spot of games that don't try to appeal to everybody, they aren't going to be unanimously heralded at the expense of whatever edges they sand off to keep their charisma or their character, their charm.
Oh, it's very sad. Wikipedia says the PC version was commercially unsuccessful. PC Data reported it sells at 28,000 units, which is a giant flop. PC version was a runner-up for best game no one played. Oh, that is really sad.
Just because we're a UK-based podcast, we wanted to see if there was any memories of interaction with the European publishing side of things, because we noticed that, for example, Snowcross and Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2 were published by Ubisoft in Europe, and other games had different publishers. And do you know what the decision would have been for Crave to say, right, instead of us putting this out in Europe, we're going to go somewhere else, get a European publisher like Ubisoft involved?
Yeah, that's a pretty simple answer. What had happened was maybe like a year after I got to Crave, they were like, hey, we need to publish games in Europe. How are we going to do that? And right around that time, there was, I think it was Virgin had shut down their European operation. And these guys, there were two German guys that were running that, and they called us up, and basically said, do you want us to start, Crave Europe for you guys? And so we ended up hiring, I don't know, like 40 or 50 people. That it was like the entire Virgin European operation. And they were just bleeding so much cash. It was like these guys showed up on day one. I'm not trying to like cast shade on them or whatever, but we were like this tight organization. I was fighting for paper clips, and it was like every one of them had a Mercedes company car, and they had these lavish offices. We were like sitting on boxes and like using like metal barrels with fire for heat, and it's like these guys just, all the money we had made, they flushed down the toilet in Europe. It was this massive disaster, and I think it went on for about a year and a half or 2 years, and then we shut it down and got rid of all of them. So what had happened was, I think they would have published a few games.
Yeah.
for that time period. And then when they disappeared, and that was probably one of the first of 2 or 3 times that Crave had a big financial coming to Jesus. And, Crave would, they would make these financial projections that were like, we're going to sell 1 million of everything. And then what would happen is then it didn't happen and the money didn't come in. And then they would go, oh shit, we're out of money. And so, that happened. Then that's when they shut down Europe. And then they said to me, all right, we're going to, we have 3 publishers in Europe that we want to go make deals with. And so I literally had to get on a plane with a PC, and there was no gaming laptops back then. So I had like a full desktop PC, like wrapped up in a box. And I would go to meetings with every publisher in Europe and basically trying to get, European co-publishing deals. And we went to Ubisoft, and they loved the games. They were like, yeah, this is great. We can do this. And so we ended up in a long-term deal with Ubisoft. And so it was great because like they were professionals. They knew exactly what they were doing. I'd go there once a year, twice a year, whatever. Like whenever I was in France, I'd go there. And we had another game. There was this game that never came out called H2 Overdrive that was being developed in France. So I'd go to Ubisoft and show them the stuff, and they were great. They were a great partner. They were really good to work with, very professional.
Was H2 Overdrive, that wasn't Dreamcast, was it?
It might have been. It might have started Dreamcast. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was a French developer that was one of these, like this kind of thing happens all the time where it was a media company that was not a game development company, but they had hired a bunch of game developers and put them in a room and said, we're a game developer now. It was a disaster. I mean, there's a stereotype about French developers not being very good. The stereotype is that they're great graphically, but that they're not so good at like gameplay. And I think that was definitely kind of the case here. And I would go there once a month, and I'd sit there and say to them, all right, guys, you need to let's finish level 1. We get one level that plays well, then the rest is cake. And they couldn't get it to happen. I think now that I'm kind of, it's flooding back to me, I think there was someone working on that who was someone at Crave that was not very good. And that person had been shuffled around the team a little bit. And that project ended up, in like kind of development hell because of kind of mismanagement. And then after I left, they ended up in a legal battle, and they ended up suing them and trying to get all the money back because the project was a disaster. But it was basically speedboat racing.
Yeah, I mean, just a random thought off the top of my head, but it sounded like Crave went all in on Dreamcast, and then presumably at some point you guys were like, yeah, this isn't working, with the Dreamcast not doing as well as maybe you all thought.
Well, I mean, look, the thing was, like, if you look at something like Tokyo Extreme, AeroWings, anything, Magnetic Neo, those games didn't cost Crave a lot of money. So what would typically happen with a deal like that is you'd go to Japan, they'd have this game, like Neo was an existing game, it was done, it was shipped, and they would cut a pretty easy deal. Maybe it was like $50,000 or something, maybe 100. And for the Japanese, that was gravy. There'd be a royalty, so they'd make money when the game shipped. But Crave's kind of expenses out the door were not that big. And so obviously the expense would be the localization and then the cost of goods. But our break even may have been 20,000 units or something. So I wouldn't be surprised if we broke even on the Dreamcast business. I'm sure Crave made money on the Dreamcast business. Crave did a lot of smart things. I mean, certainly things like Tony Hawk and Tokyo Extreme made a lot of money. But Crave, also, the problem was you could have one or two dumb things that you put like a shitload of money into that would soak up all the profits of like all the Dreamcast games combined. Like an H2 Overdrive, for example. Probably Crave's, that was an original development. So Crave probably, I think, sunk like $1 million into that. It was like, well, there goes all your profits. So, but the Crave, frequently would, realize that they were out of money and then pull back on stuff. And then that was like the last time I think, when I was at the end of my life at Crave, I was again going to Europe with a PC and showing off, here are these 5 games we have that we're trying to do deals to either sell completely or co-publish in Europe. And, we cut enough of those deals that Crave was able to survive. After I left, Crave went on for like another 10 or 12 years, I think. And I went back, I don't know, 10 years later, I went back to Crave 3.0 and did some freelance production for them for like a year.
Yeah, it seems like an interesting business model where, especially if you're able to keep, your production costs and distribution costs and marketing relatively minimal. I mean, were there, I guess, institutions or specific like retail chains or specific, media outlets that helped make some of that easier as far as getting exposure relatively efficiently for a lot of those projects, at least the ones that made money?
Well, Crave was a subsidiary of a distributor called SVG, and like they were upstairs, we were downstairs, and SVG was one of the big 2 or 3 game distributors in America. So they had a warehouse. Like our office was like a corner of a warehouse, and the warehouse you just walk around and it was shelves of games. And I mean, it was kind of amazing to walk around and every couple of months I would go with Nima and he would say like, just take whatever you want. Right. I was like, what the hell? And so they did have really strong distribution. They could get into Toys R Us, they could get into Walmart, they could get into Kmart, like whoever was around at that time. And through SVG would sell to like a video store or like a mom and pop game shop or whatever. So they could push a lot of units that way. And obviously that's important. So, and then having Ubisoft in Europe was a big deal because they also knew how to ship a lot of product in Europe. So,
wow. Yeah, so I guess that kind of lightens the load, at least theoretically, on the front end and acquiring. And well, actually, I was kind of curious about that too, just because it seems like there's a few pillars or through lines of the types of projects that you had taken on or would decide to greenlight. And it sounds like some of that was just seeing what was out in Japan and what might be worth pursuing there, or other maybe PC games or PlayStation games or games that were on other platforms. Was there like a system in place or any sort of like formal vetting process for that, or was it just kind of a impromptu or just whatever struck your interest?
Yeah, I mean, definitely don't give too much credit for like formal systems or anything like that. I mean, there was a monthly greenlight meeting, and I think that was one of the things that I was always like, we need some process here, because it's hard to get stuff greenlight, especially as the company got bigger. And we'd have the Europeans would fly in. This is when we still had Crave Europe. And, I would usually prepare like 3 or 4 things that I would go in front of the room and pitch and say, here's this developer that we like. Like, so after something that never happened, it was kind of a shame. After we did Tokyo Xtreme Racer 1 and 2, and I was frustrated, they wouldn't let me have drag racing. They wouldn't let me have other cars. Like, we wanted European cars. And we said, look, this game could be much bigger. It could have a much bigger market. And so what we did was I came up with a brief for something I called International Xtreme Racer. And it was a bigger metagame where you would travel around the world. It had drag racing. It had drift racing. It had rally racing for the Europeans. And it had, the cars were split, American cars, European cars, Japanese cars. And we went to Climax, who had this amazing racing team in, I think it was like right next to one of the tracks. I want to say Brands Hatch, but I could be completely wrong. But they had this amazing racing team that I met with, and they were doing some game, and I can't remember what it was, but they knew their shit. And, I pitched this to them, and they were like, yeah, this is awesome. Like, we could kill this. And I think that I kind of got it like mostly greenlit. Like it was like, yeah, we're going to do this. But that was when Crave ran out of money the third time. And then at that point, they were like, everyone's laid off. So it never got done. But that was the last year that I was at Crave. I had like 3 larger games. We were trying to do like bigger games, less bigger games. And that was the big one that I'd worked on for, I mean, greenlighting that for like 6 months or something. And it would have been pretty neat, but such is life. I wish I could remember the name of that team. They were really good guys. And like went up there and like they took me wherever there was like their office, you could hear the cars at the track. And then we went over to the track for like a couple of hours. And it was like that was their lineage, right? It was that they were like literally the office was next to a racetrack.
Thanks for spending all that time going through, what your recollection of all those projects, especially at Crave. I guess we can kind of fast forward a bit to today, as you are now the co-CEO of Argonaut, having recently released the Croc Legend of Gobos remaster. I guess I just kind of open it up with a last question to see if you'd like to talk a bit more about what you're doing there and what everyone's working on at Argonaut.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, we started really with this idea of bring back Croc, and Argonaut, that was their biggest game. That was, and it was also their best game, I think. And my partner Gary and I have known Jez Sand since, in Gary's case, since they were kids. In my case, since the late '80s when we were all doing 8-bit NES stuff together. And we were at his house, just like talking about Croc, and we said we want to do something, and Jez said, "Yeah, okay, we should do that. Like, Croc should come back, And I had done 4 or 5 remasters at that point, like Battlezone, Toy Soldiers, Blood Rain, and Blood Rain 2, Battlezone 2. Sorry. So I was like, hey, remasters, I know how to do that. Like, we've done that before. So Jez said, sure, make a pitch. So we put a pitch together, and my team in Australia was really into the idea. They were like, Croc sounds amazing. We found the source code. Some kid in Australia had the source code. Like, we don't know how. To this day, we still don't know how he got it. So we built a plan. Originally, the plan was just to do this one game. And we're like, we'll make a bunch of money and, we'll buy Ferraris. And there are a lot less Ferraris in game development than you would think. There's a lot of people who want Ferraris, but getting to that level doesn't always come as easy as we think. So we spent, almost 2 years working on it. And I think, maybe 6 months into it, we said, what do we call the company? And we were talking to Jez, and we said, look, like, what if this is not just a remaster of Croc, but like a relaunch of Argonaut? And he was like, okay, yeah, like, I'm okay with that. Like, that seems like a good idea. So then I think we shifted from this idea of just remastering one game to, hey, like, let's start to build a company. Let's start to build multiple games. And what else does Argonaut own? What else? What should we do next? Conversations like that start to happen. And it could mean I mean, I think in general, Argonaut is retro. I think Argonaut is remasters. I think Argonaut might be new versions of old IP, and at some point it could be new IP. So we're just, we're kind of a little open-minded at this point, and we're super excited about Croc.
We are wondering if Argonaut is ever going to remaster Red Dog, which obviously brings us back to Crave, who published Red Dog.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, it's kind of funny. Like, so I've known Jez since the 80s, like I said. I mean, there was a point when I was working with Climax, I would be in the UK like every 6 weeks or so.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, Jez's wife would be like, "Where are you staying?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm staying at some shitty hotel or whatever." It's like, "No, you're not. You're staying at our house." And so I would hang out. I'd go there for, a couple of meetings, and I'd stay for an extra week. And, Jez likes to go to the movies. I like to go to the movies. So we'd go to the movies, we'd hang out, we'd eat places and do British things. But the joke was that we'd never worked together. They were always pitching stuff to us, whether I was at Sony, whether I was at Crave, and there was always stuff being pitched, but we never did anything together. And one day Jez called me and said, "Hey, we have this game called Red Dog, and we own it, and it's published by some company in Europe. Can you guys publish it in the US?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Like we put it through Greenlight, but it was like a really easy deal. Like it didn't cost us anything. So I think my name is in the credits. I don't think I did anything.
Yeah, it's not down on like we used the source Moby Games for like your credits.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like I literally think there were a bunch of emails. Like they sent me the ROM files. I think we said, "Here's the logo. Put the logo in," and then somebody on my team like put it in a FedEx envelope. Back then, you had to burn discs.
Yeah.
So you had to burn the discs, test the discs, you had to label the discs. There were like labeling standards, and then you would ship it to Sega. So that's probably the extent of my work on Red Dog. So it was just kind of funny, like that years later, Jez is like, "Oh, and too bad we never worked together." And I was like, "Oh, don't forget Red Dog." And so we've talked about it. And Red Dog, the code got open sourced.
Yeah.
And it was, of course, as soon as I heard about that, I was like, "Oh, can we undo that?" Remember I was talking before about this idea that like the first games on a new platform and the last games on a new platform are so far apart usually. And, if you look at Red Dog, like it looks like such a good game. Like almost, no insult, but almost looks better than a Dreamcast game.
Yeah, it's a good looking game for sure.
So I have a little fondness for Red Dog, and I don't know what that means in terms of like business, but I don't know.
Maybe you can influence it in the right direction.
I have the same fondness for Dreamcast in general.
Yeah.
And I think there's always a discussion around the hallway. I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm pretty sure Gary doesn't listen to these things. So
Well, let us know if we need to edit anything out.
No, it's fine. But no, I mean, I just say we have a fondness for Dreamcast. And so there's always a discussion, which is like, wouldn't it be fun if, like Croc, for example, there was always a rumor that there was a Dreamcast version of Croc.
Yeah, Croc 2 I've heard as well.
It's not true.
Okay.
It didn't happen. Somebody might have worked on it for a week or something. Yeah. But there was never anything playable. There was never, it never developed into anything. But there's always this discussion kind of like, I wonder what would happen if we took, if we did like take the original Croc, and what's the market? The thing is like we would do it in an instant if we knew we could sell it. And, what is the market for a Dreamcast? I know there's these guys in the UK, I'm sure they've got like 10 Dreamcast games.
Yeah, it's an easy system to break open, basically. So you can literally sell, a pressed disc that will run on a Dreamcast. We've had Postal was officially licensed and released. Flashback.
Okay. But who are these guys? There's a team in the UK, and they've got like 10 games. They're all original games.
Yeah.
And I think they're just making new Dreamcast games.
Yeah, there's been quite a few in publishers that have come and gone. But yeah.
In fact, I want to hook up with these guys just because it's like I don't have any in my collection.
Yeah.
How do I not have Dreamcast games in my collection? Here, look at this. Driving Strikers, Sega Dreamcast, 19 pounds. Oh, here's Postal.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think this is the publisher though. I think this is.
Sounds like that's Wave that you're.
Wave Games.
Yeah.
Wave, yeah. That's what, so is Wave the actual publisher?
Yeah, of those releases. Yeah, I mean, Driving Strikers is an online game as well, so you can play it online if you have the means to hook it up to the.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Dreamcast had a modem, right?
Yeah.
But was there internet? Like, I'm sorry, I'm using dumb terminology here. There was a modem, but was there like a hardwire, like Ethernet jack on the Dreamcast?
You could get a broadband adapter.
That's what it was. There was a broadband adapter. Yeah, I think I have one of those. Because I played Phantasy Star Online on Dreamcast. A bunch of us at Crave would play in the evenings.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's something we keep talking about. Like maybe we should do a Kickstarter. And if we get enough, we can get enough money to fund it. Then I think it would be really fun to do.
So, I mean, we love in Dreamcast indie releases, but I appreciate that it's a niche audience. When Postal got announced for Dreamcast, that was like big headlines on some of the gaming websites. Something like that's quite interesting. Wow, they've put Postal on an old console.
I mean, there must be a story there. Like somebody must have wanted to do it or did it in their garage or something.
Yeah, Running with Scissors released the source code with the caveat, if someone puts together a Dreamcast version, he said, we'll release the source code. So someone did, and the guy, Dan Redfield, he's called, developed the version of Postal, and he added local multiplayer, twin stick support. It's a very impressive port that just one guy did, with the source code.
That's amazing. I love my Dreamcast. It's like I've got 3 of them. I think at some point I had to swap the drives around to get one that actually worked, and because I really wanted to play, a couple of those. I really wanted to play Tokyo Xtreme Racer, to be honest. And I think at some point there was an Xbox 360 game from Genki it was TXR, but it was called Import Tuner Challenge, I think it was called. And I played it, and it just didn't feel like, I was like, no, I think the Dreamcast version was better, So I ended up getting my Dreamcast hooked up just to play that damn game.
Yeah, I know in early access, Genki's released a modern 2025 adaptation of Tokyo Xtreme Racer, which is really fun. I mean, that surprised me how much of that is really held true to kind of the hook that those Dreamcast games really had, and PS2 games.
Yeah, I read some of the I haven't played it, but I looked on the Steam forums and I was kind of reading the feedback, and it was interesting to see what people were talking about. And it feels like it does seem very similar to the Dreamcast games. Like they didn't change that much, which is good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, for Dreamcast stuff, we'll always kind of think wistfully, but also enjoy it in the moment because you can still play this shit. So and we do all the time. But anyway, Mike, thank you again for joining us. I think we can just kind of wrap up at this point. Where can people find you if indeed you want to be found via social media or other places?
I would politely ask people not show up at my house.
Yeah.
And I'm on Twitter, I guess. I don't know what my Twitter handle is. I'm on the Blue Sky, but I don't really I always have a plan to go and tweet more and talk about game dev more, and then I just kind of lose interest. So I did a whole thread on Twitter about all the fun stuff at Acclaim, and then the idea was then I was going to go to do something about Sony and then Fox and Crave, and then just kind of keep going through my whole career. But I only did the Acclaim segment, and then I lost interest. So someday I am Zono Mike on Twitter, and my last tweet was in April. So I tweeted I was putting all my pins. I've been collecting pins from game, like from conferences and stuff, and so I started to put them on these like mats so I can hang the collection up in my living room. So I posted a picture of that, and 2 people liked it. So
hey, we'll go on there and like it.
Your Twitter might have more engagement than mine does, so I just need to post more, I guess. But yeah, I mean, like, look, I'm excited to talk to you guys. Dreamcast, is one of the highlights of my career. I mean, there were so many great games. It was such a great time for the game business. It was really like that was a lot of fun working at Crave, and we had a great relationship with Sega, and they were super fun to work with. They were just good people. But yeah, thanks for bringing all the memories back.
Yeah, and thanks for taking 2 hours at this point.
I'm gonna go back to bed now.
Yeah, fair. No, yeah, or coffee or whatever you need. Lewis, where can people find the Dreamcast Junkyard stuff?
Yeah, our website is www.thedreamcastjunkyard.co.uk, where you can find our articles and everything else that we have to talk about in text form. And then you can find us also on all the social medias. You've got Twitter at the DC Junkyard, Blue Sky we're on there as well. Just search us up. We're on Discord. We're on Facebook. We're on everything. Yeah, if you use any of those particular social medias, go find us.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's all I got. You want to take us home? Do we want to have like a closeout catchphrase or something?
I don't know if Mike has one.
To infinity and beyond. No, wait a minute. That's somebody already used that one.
No, we might get Disney's lawyers. Whoops.
Welcome to the next level.
There we go.
This is a Dreamcast disc. 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 Disc, and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers. Please stop this disc now.